Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Presenting Our Presence. This is our monthly podcast at the University of Alberta, and we're here to introduce people to the amazing Indigenous folks that enliven this community every day and support and encourage students and just make this place so much more beautiful and lovely. My name is Michelle Durocher. I am from the Fishing Lake Métis settlement. And here at the university, I work in the Office of the President as the Executive Operations Coordinator. We have a special guest co-host today. So I'm going to lead it over to Paul to introduce yourself. And let's get the party started, guys.
It's a party. Tanse, bon matin, everyone. My name is Paul Gareau. I am Métis from the Batoche homeland area, born and raised. I am an associate professor and associate dean of graduate studies in the Faculty of Native Studies. That's why I wear the jacket. They gave me one for free. I paid for it, actually. And I'm very happy to be here as a co-host. I'll try to stay quiet and just listen and be participant, but we'll have lots of fun. And I want to introduce Ceilidh Morrissette as our amazing star person in the spotlight today. Ceilidh.
Yeah, Tanse, everybody. My name is Ceilidh Morrissette, and I am Cree Métis from Muskegway Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. That is in between North Battleford and Prince Albert, for those of you that are not familiar with the lovely landscape of Saskatchewan. So I have a long standing history of my family in Saskatchewan. My great-great-great-grandfather was Chief Mistawasis, one of the original signers of Treaty 6. As well as, thanks to Paul posting on Facebook the other day, I now know that my family signed scrip in Red River settlement with both the Arcand and the Morrissette side of my family. So I have a very long history with my province and come from it very well. So I do miss the beautiful sunsets that we have in the summer, but no, I've been living in Edmonton now for about 20 years. So this is where I now call home on Treaty 6. We also let you know what my job is.
Yes, yeah, I was going to ask.
Sunsets. Let's talk about more sunsets.
I do earn a paycheck here. So December 4th is actually going to be my 1 year anniversary. I'm now the Indigenous Initiative Strategic Officer for the College of Natural and Applied Sciences. So that includes the faculties of Engineering, Science, and our Faculty of AILS.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ceilidh. I just also had my university anniversary. So isn't that interesting? Yeah, can't believe how quickly things go by. So I just wanted to thank you, Ceilidh, for taking your time today to talk to us. I know that we had talked earlier about what you wanted to share today, and we were going to go away from kind of a work-related thing, and you wanted to talk about some of your volunteering that you do here in Amiskwaciwa-Skaghan. So do you want to share a little bit about the kind of things that you volunteer with in our community?
Yeah, for sure. So I have been volunteering weekly with an organization that we have in Edmonton, and they are called Water Warriors. Water Warriors is an amazing grassroots organization that started during the pandemic. And really what we do is we serve our houseless population down in their city, Edmonton, actually 2 different times throughout the week. So it's quite the organization where every Thursday night we will load up with supplies for our houseless population. So we hand out different things like snacks, water, harm reduction supplies, hygiene items. We also load up a U-Haul trailer or truck every week, and we hand out clothing donations as well. So any winter clothing that's needed, any basically undergarments, we hand out anything that our houseless population would need, in terms from crutches to masks to antiseptics to anything. So we are down in the streets every Thursday evening, working with that population. Every Sunday, we actually have a team that will take pre-packed backpacks out into those areas that aren't maybe as accessible. So they actually will hike into the river valley and find those really deep hidden encampments and give supplies out to those folks there as well so that they're not missing out on our services. And then every Saturday afternoon, I actually also go into our warehouse location and help sort our clothing donations that we hand out every Thursday evening as well. So those clothing that we don't hand out, we then pass along to another organization that is in Wetaskiwin. It's called a Rock Soup, and it's actually an amazing organization that they deliver everything to the communities. Anyone can come in to their space, pick up clothing, pick up food, pick up basically anything that they need, and it serves the communities out in Musquecheese. So there's quite a community and network available for the houseless population that we have in Edmonton.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize when we initially chatted about this that you were so involved. That's amazing. What inspired you to get involved in this kind of work and to be so so in it? Like this is not like an occasional thing. What inspired you to start this?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons for inspiration. First of all, I used to work in downtown Edmonton. So I used to work at the city, at the Chamber of Commerce. So I was down in that inner city, really seeing what our people were, what it looked like every day for them, what coming out of the buildings, seeing, our people sitting on the side of the streets, just being exposed to them and seeing them from a different lens. But I think really what drives my inspiration and my passion is I was a homeless person myself in my early 20s. And it's never one of those things you will ever expect yourself to end up in, where I got involved in, well, I have a long history, but with the intergenerational trauma, I got involved with some people that were not necessarily good people. I was in university at the time and just starting my second year of studies. And let's put it this way. I was pretty protected during my youth. So once I got to university, I kind of exploded with my freedom. And my studies were not my priority at the time. So I made a couple decisions for myself that I actually ended up being evicted from my apartment at that time and was involved in a relationship that was very toxic. And very codependent at that time. And I was actually battling with my own addictions at that time as well. So very short steps from that place into houselessness. So I was actually homeless for a year. I was on the streets for about 2 months, living on the side of the streets, and then ended up on a friend's parents' basement, kind of couch surfing for the next 10 to 12 months. So during that time, I really learned had that lived experience of what it means to have to go look for your food every day. How do you find, having to go through the butt containers? I was a smoker at the time, so I would go through the butt containers outside of different places to look for cigarettes every day. You become very entrenched in survival and what that means just to focus on that day or that hour and not being able to function beyond that day and to set yourself up for success. So I really do understand what the day-to-day survival means for working with this population. And the services that we offer with volunteering through Water Warriors, just those little differences and those little instances that you can give this person that they don't need to go look for things like, where's my next meal coming from? I don't have socks. I don't have winter boots. So helping to alleviate some of these little things throughout their day is allowing some breathing space, and some moments to feel human. And I think the biggest thing I hear from the houseless population is they get used to people not saying their name or having their name heard. They're used to being served as, hey, my friend, or hey, bud, or hey, cousin, but they lose track of people saying their names. So for me, that has become also one of my mantras with working with this population, is to learn people's names and where they're from. And that really comes back to us as an Indigenous community, and really understanding someone's history and their connections, regardless of the situation they're in at this time. So yeah, real passion from a lived experience.
Yeah, oh wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I was actually just having a conversation with another Indigenous colleague of ours, and I was explaining the process of this pop thing that we do. And I said that we introduce ourselves and we introduce where we're from, and how I think that is maybe uniquely Indigenous to always start with, this is where I'm from, this is who claims me. That is so, I think that is very, I'm like, I can't think of any of my other friends that do that kind of thing. But to us, it's so important. So to be with the houseless population in our city and to find out their names and where they're from, that is going to mean so much more to them, I think, than just what you give, like physically, what you give them and can provide for them for their needs, but also just giving them that sense of emotional connection that that isn't always there, right? So that's amazing.
Yeah,
Paul,
Kaylee, I feel like that's such a Métis thing too, like in terms of my own experience of like, you talk about each other and know each other, like you're a Morrissette, you're an Arcan, you're from these places, right? You're Durocher, like all these things are all this patchwork quilt that got frayed by colonialism, right? And I feel like a lot of our people have been lost to that colonial fraying. So this move of like just this act of like recognizing those names and those connections. So have you been seeing that, like having like a like an effect with the people that you're encountering? Have you met relatives? Have you like, and also to like, how deep does this go to, like what other things that you do that are uniquely Indigenous in your own like outlook and way that you're doing things?
Yeah, so the one thing that I do bring with me when I'm doing patrol is I will bring smudge with me. So a lot of our houseless population, and I want to just take a moment and just explain why we say houseless rather than homeless. That's been a change of vocabulary that we've seen in the last year or two, and really I prefer the word houseless because you can make anywhere your home, right? Anywhere can be home as long as you claim that area. And so for us, home can be the shelter, home can be a cardboard box, home can be my apartment, home can be, that place that I go and visit at Medicine Lake in Jasper, where my heart lives. That's home, right? But to have a house is a completely different structure. So I wanted to make that differentiation because people are changing their vocabulary as we go along. But for me, I also do bring smudging with me on patrol. I don't have it lit the whole time, but that's also one thing that we know about our houseless population is that disconnect from culture, especially with the intergenerational trauma that we know the healing takes place through culture and through ceremony. And to have that available to them as one of our volunteers, even having that smudge available to them can make a connection for them that they haven't had for a very long time. And I hear a lot of people ask, well, I'm not allowed to smudge because I've used today. And I'm like, that's okay. That's the teachings that you've been given. But if your heart calls to it, it is here for you, right? So the other thing I've noticed in asking, our brothers and sisters on the street, where are you from? A lot of them will say, well, I'm from Edmonton. No. Where are you really from? Right. And that changes the dynamic of the conversation. Especially when I find people who are actually from the Arctic or Northern Inuit people, there are so many of them here on our streets because they have to come down for medical procedures. And a lot of them get stuck here, right? And to get a plane ride back home, like I was looking at a plane ticket to Iqaluit the other day because there was a conference I was looking at. $5,000. So how is someone who has been stranded on the streets of Edmonton to find their way home? So this is where the community building on the streets is so important to our Indigenous people. And this is also the tragedy of breaking up these encampments in the past year. Because those encampments, yes, they do come with risks. They do come with, the things that the government want to push out for the reason of bringing them down. But community exists there and safety exists within those encampments. So I think as we talk about dismantling these encampments for our folks, we don't realize the human impacts that they're having and breaking up the culture and the community that are being built by our Indigenous people.
I was just going to ask you about that because I think we talked about how you were there when the encampment downtown was separated. I think it was just after Christmas, or was it just before or after Christmas last year?
Just after Christmas.
Yeah, and you were there, right? You were there to support any of the folks that were at that encampment, and just to what was that like, and how do you support them? How do you support people in that kind of situation when there's really you can't stop what's happening, but what is your solution to being there for them?
Yeah, that so as water warriors, we knew the encampments, they had let the inner city agencies know what was going to be happening. They were going to start them before Christmas, and we violently or vigorously asked them not to because of the community building and the trauma that you would instill in those communities. So there were 8 encampments that we knew of that were being we called them evicted or ripped down. So as water warriors, we were asked to go and be witnesses to what was happening. So it's a very fine line to walk because we could not get in the way because we could be seen as we could have been arrested. Basically, if we were seen as anyway impeding the work that was being done.
Yeah,
but
you
we
can't
were there
interfere, right? But
but we could witness, so the police and the workers were being held accountable for their actions at that time. So I'd been to a couple of them. The one that really stuck out to me was the one that was being dismantled across from Hope Mission downtown, right behind the EPCOR Tower. And So that whole block there were various tents, families that had been set up. So we knew what time approximately they were going to be coming to be tearing them down. Now, we have to give the city credit that they did let the people know 2 days ahead of time. They would be coming within 2 days so that they had time to take down their tents and to move their stuff. Now, that may have been useful if you're talking about people without mental health issues, without ADHD, without all of these barriers to help them process what is going on. So I remember the morning we showed up, it was deathly cold, like cold, cold, cold. We had various agencies out there handing out hot chocolate, handing out, the toe warmers, the mitt warmers. But the first thing that happened is we had one of our Inuit community members come running up and let us know that one of their cousins had passed away that night in one of the tents that was going to be ripped down. So we ensured that we went and got an elder. We were able to smudge the area, to sit with her, to do the cultural appropriate things that she needed at that time. So we basically stood on the other side of the street from the tents. We had smudge available. We had all the supports available for them. And it was a scene out of a movie where you could see the police cars coming down the street. And then we saw the trucks, the garbage trucks. And then the city workers got out and started putting on hazmat suits. Full white masks. They had the hazard masks on, the gloves, taping up the boots. It was something out of a movie. And all that they started at one end of the street, and anything that was left on the street went straight into the garbage. So we were watching this happen at one end of the street, and at the very far end, there was a couple that hadn't even started taking down their tents, and they had an extensive setup. And we were working with the people, the people that work down at the agencies know their population, they know their people, they know how to find them. So they went up to this gentleman and said, I forget what his name was, but, you need to start taking down your stuff. You need to start putting it, we need to get you ready. They're coming down the street. And he froze. He's like, everything is important. I need to take everything. And he went into full panic. So we as a community, we were no longer witnesses. We started working with the population to help him figure out what he needed to take and what he could leave behind. But to be able to process that as you're watching the trucks come down the street to take your stuff, I can't even describe what this pair had to go through and how we were trying to get them to decipher what was important in their life, because everything was important. So as we were packing up this individual, we had workers come to us and say, we have another individual, Albert, who is in a wheelchair and he needs help moving his things. And this really explained to me how useless this process is. Because what we did for Albert was we had about 7 workers literally pick up his tent, one of us on each peg. The rest of us gathered up his shopping cart and we're like, all right, Albert, we're following you. And where do you want us to set you up? So Albert had one of his partners with him. Albert was a double amputee. He had lost some of his limbs due to frostbite, which is such a risk for our houseless population. But we literally followed Albert down the alley. He knew exactly where he wanted to go. He had a little spot that he was familiar with in another alley just behind Rogers Place. We picked up his stuff, moved him to the alley, and set him up, made sure he had what he needed. And so basically the encampments are just displacing people rather than actually servicing them. So that was one of the encampments I witnessed. But that was basically every encampment that we went to. We went as witnesses, but ended up helping that population by the time we got there. And then I think most of us are familiar with the one encampment where our Indigenous people took a stand. That was the encampment that Brandy Morin was a part of, that also, where she was arrested, as well as some of our journalists. But that was where Roy Cardinal, who was the leader of that encampment, took a stand and finally said, eagle feathers up, boys. And that's where they forced them to take them out of that land. So I'm so proud of them. But what a traumatic experience. And it continues to happen to this day. So if one of our houseless population even has a tarp over them as they're laying on the sidewalk trying to have a sleep, they will come up, rip off the tarp and be like, you can't have this, and off, and they keep going. So yeah, that's a little bit about what's been happening in our city the past year.
I think, thank you so much for that story. I think this is what happens all the time, and things get swept into the gutter all the time, swept into the ditch, and I find it really because I find it ironic and strange but interesting is that the service providers, the agencies know everyone, but these forces, these coercive forces, don't know everyone or don't know anyone or claim to not know anyone. And you hear that history over and over again throughout coming back to colonization. And I kept thinking over and over again, road allowance, our relatives who were road allowance after, the resistance in Batoche, or this moment where settlers just poured into the prairies, into this area, and how an attitudinal difference for road allowance between being garbage people sitting in the ditch, not doing anything, being lazy, all this crap perspectives on the Métis half-breeds and and First Nations people who were, put into a road allowance place. And I keep thinking about Cheryl Troop, who's a Métis professor at the U of S, and how she changed my perspective on that, saying that road allowance was an act of sovereignty. It was the last places where our bunches lived together, and how our relatives tried to be in bunches everywhere. We kept being pushed aside. And if we tried to resist and be in a bunch again, then they arrest us, or, all these things. So yeah. Kaylee, I would love to hear what you think about, especially what you talk about Brandy Morin and the stand that the people took, and reflections on sovereignty. Is that come into your mind and you're thinking about this, or?
100%, because at the end of the day, this is our land, and the irony of them kicking us off our land is not lost on us. Mm-hmm. And I think about the encampment. So I've been with Water Warriors. Last summer was when I started volunteering with them, before this whole encampment happened. And I think of the one encampment that we would go to behind Rogers Place. They had it was all fenced off. They built a community, and they built an Indigenous community there, where it reminded me so much, because they would go from tent to tent and share the food and share their resources. And you would hear laughter nonstop throughout all the tents, and one of the tents had a sign up on it saying, for rent, $500 a month. And just that humor that was even brought in by our people into what we would consider one of the worst situations, living situations. The humor and the community are still there.
I love that.
And by breaking up these encampments, you're right, Paula, it's the same as the road allowance, where you're breaking up the community that we've rebuilt for ourselves in this time. And it's just recreating what our people have gone through ever since colonization.
Yeah,
boy.
that's what I was thinking. I was like, this is history repeating itself, and they should know better now that we're gonna find a way to get back together.
We'll go in the
Yeah.
corner just around.
Come
Right?
on, you've been trying to do this for years, people, but we keep finding our ways back to each other, right?
And it's an interesting thing to think about, where it's just like we think about houselessness as this, like, because a moral pariah. That's a very Protestant ethic, Christian perspective of being like, if you can't survive and get a job and a wife and a whatever, like whatever you want, that means that you're immoral. Like there's something that the grace of God doesn't come on you, Whereas this, like, no, these are our sovereign moments. This is us resisting the colonization of separation by staying together. But then the systems don't support that ethos or that way of living. And it's sucks so bad, Yeah.
Well, and what really, just to take a line from Florence Glanfield, what really burns my bananas
really says
I love that line. What burns my bananas is the provincial government that we have right now. The solution that they had was to set up this services hub, right? This idea that we can ship these houseless people to this hub, and we can provide them their services that they need from there. And if they don't want the services, they can go back out onto the streets.
It's like a reserve system, like, in a way, right?
Yeah. Hey, doesn't that sound like every other institution that our Indigenous people have been shipped off to?
Yep.
So tell me how that system is going to work when all the other ones have not, right? You're wanting to put us on buses, ship us to an institution, give us a number, and figure we're going to be safe.
Treat us as strangers,
And this is also why our shelter systems do not work. One of my best friends is also a part of Water Warriors, and great Métis guy, so put his plug in there. But he really wanted to see what our population went through when they stayed in the shelters. So he actually went down and stayed in the shelters for 3 nights. He lived down there, he ate down there, he slept down there. I think what an amazing experience to be able to come back and break some of the stereotypes that we had about people staying in shelters. But the biggest thing I noticed from his stories is there were no Indigenous people in there. Most of the people in the shelters were either Caucasian or not Canadian. They were new immigrants. So to come across most Indigenous people in the shelters was actually very minimal. So that says a lot as well.
That is so amazing. I keep coming back to kinship as being like this governing force that, drives our lives, right? So that, like, that is an interesting insight. Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of people who are new immigrants to Canada have also kinship as like a dominant and governing force, but then don't have those relations here. So they fall into the system.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So we don't see the shelters as being supportive of the way that we live and our knowledge systems, right? We don't separate our men and women. We don't separate families, right? So we have a lot of learning to do, and I have to do a plug for those organizations that are doing it right, and places like Niganon, Ambrose Place, where they have set up, they took the old Yellowhead Inn out on Yellowhead Trail there and have made it into supportive housing. Like, these are organizations that get it, but we don't have enough of them.
I was gonna ask a question, but Michelle, I've been asking a lot of questions. Michelle, you do questions now.
Aw, thanks, Paul. Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's I think it's one of those things where I go from feeling um like it's hard to hear. It's hard to hear these realizations, these realities of our people, but then to also hear this other side of like they're creating a community for themselves and there's still laughter and there's still joy and there's still
Yes.
family. And so I'm like, well, why I mean that I can't fault them for still being able to get that connection to each other. Like what an amazing resilience in our people, right? That no matter what, they will find a way to giggle, they will find a way to laugh and enjoy their lives. Um, and I'm just so grateful to these organizations who are doing it right, like you said, that can understand that um, that kinship that is needed, that ceremony, that spirituality that some of them need, but maybe they're not ready to accept into their lives again. And like what that's that's more than just um, that's more than just a backpack. That's more than just what we can do physically, what we can do with like goods and services. Like it's more than that, and I think that's really incredible. And it makes me feel like there's so much more that this government can do, but aren't listening to the people who are doing it right because they have this notion of, well, this is how we're going to do it, this is what we think is right. So it's like, what do we need to do as Indigenous people, Indigenous organizations, maybe places like the Métis Nations of Alberta, or places like Treaty 6 or uh, Treaty 7 like governments? What can they do to influence provincial government? Do you have any insights into something like that?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a great, and I really wish I had the magic answer for that. I think at this point, the government that we have in place right now is not necessarily one that is going to be able to work with the nations. Um, they have very much have the white savior complex, right? We know what's best for you and we
Exactly.
are going to carry it out and we are not going to consult. So if they have that closed door policy, we can make as much noise as we can, but really we need a change of leadership. Um, I know Paul's shaking his head at this point,
Incredible.
but really it comes down to why are you talking about us without us? Right. And that's a mantra that I carry through my work here at the university is don't talk about us without us at the table. Because again, we get into the white savior complex and we don't need that. That has not worked for us whatsoever. So why don't you consult with us about what we actually do need? And the needs are very basic, you know, have affordable housing. Our houseless number has jumped by 47% this year. We are now at over 4,500 houseless people in Edmonton. I don't know the percentage of that being Indigenous, but I would say it's probably at least close to 70, if not 80%, right? So why have our numbers jumped? Me talking to our population down there, there are so many people who are like, I never would have expected I ended up houseless. I was one paycheck away. I missed one rent payment. I did this. We need affordable housing and we need wraparound services. So we need housing that will provide them with a safe place, a place they can lock at night. You have no idea how much it impacts you by not having proper sleep. And how do you sleep when you don't know if you're going to be safe that night? By having someplace you can lock and have a proper sleep, is half the battle. Because think about what we go through when we haven't had a good sleep. We're not making good decisions. We're just trying to survive through the day. I mean, how do you even look for a job when you're haven't had a proper sleep? So wraparound services, mental health supports, not forcing people into treatment, because I worked at Palmakers Lodge treatment centers before the university, so I have experience in a treatment center. Forcing people into treatment before they are ready is wasted money, right? So we can advocate as Indigenous people for our people. We know what is best and what we need, and cultural and spiritual supports are at the top of the list as well. But with the current government, I don't know how much of our voices they're going to hear. So lots of solutions, but it really comes down to who's in government right now.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting about institutionalization here that needs to be, just I highlighted, right? Like especially around, like you said, like the white savior complex. Like this road is paved with good intentions, right? And like it's a mental health crisis. It's a like institutional racism crisis. Like it's like a morality crisis. Like all these things, but that is all settler colonial issues, not like that's something that falls onto our communities and our nations, and it's something that like the paradigm in charge doesn't understand that this is never an Indigenous issue but a white people issue.
Yes.
And I think that's like always been like the biggest like sort of like articulation that Indigenous studies and Indigenous communities have been trying to say for years and years and years, right? Like
yeah, and I will, people tribes like Enoch set up their own shelter out by the Coliseum and is housing it and is following down the path of Niganon. But not all nations have that ability to do that.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Enoch is a very unique nation with their with where they're located, as well as the buying power of the nation, right? I know my reserve can't just buy a hotel and start supporting it as much as they want to. But I think the nations are starting to take ownership over their people as much as they can. But how much of that how far does that actually go, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like there's only so much you can do, and especially if you're from a like you said, a northern community, like the resources are limited as is, right? So to get someone to come and get their person or get their people, it's not in the cards. So I think we're gonna have to end up closing out our conversation here. We're gonna
what?
So I was gonna say, so if there's any other comments you want to make, Paul, before we throw it over to Ceilidh to finish us
Ceilidh,
out.
I really appreciate your story about experiencing the fallout of I would say colonialism, right? And the moments. So for you, I wouldn't mind hearing from you to say what brought you back into relations in your story. Like how did you like you couch surf for 10 months and stuff, but then how did you come out of that, or how should we frame that, like because I often think about Jesse Thistle's like work, especially that's a cousin, right? So like you hear his story and it's about like I think a lot of people say, oh, he came out of it, now he's like doing great, whatever, but it was like his experience of relations and falling out of relations that were extremely tragic in the way I was perceiving it, right? In his story, but that doesn't have to do with houselessness, or it's not homelessness at all. It's like relationlessness, right? So I wouldn't mind hearing, like, if you don't mind, just hearing about how you came into relations.
And I think that really is you hit the nail on the head, Paul, in terms of Jesse's story and part of my story and all the stories that I hear is that we've lost our identity. We've lost our community and we've lost our identity, and it's the one thing that has changed my perspective, in the past couple of years, is not to look at somebody and say, what's wrong with you? But then to look at somebody and be, what happened to you? Right? So it changes the perspective. And when we change this perspective, we then learn someone's story, and their story explains why they are the way they are. And I think for Indigenous people and for myself, coming out of my situation, because for me, I had a very pivotal point in my life where I was houseless, I was a drug addict, I was involved in a very abusive, codependent relationship. Where do I go? And what value does my life have at this point? And for me, the turning point was really reconnecting with my family, and with knowing I still had the support of my family. Even though I was going through all of this, I knew they were still back there saying, we have you when you're ready to pick yourself up. And I think that for me, that was the difference between me getting out of my situation versus someone else who didn't get out of their situation, was knowing that we had the support of when we did pick ourselves up, because no one can pick yourself up for you. You have to do that work. So for me, it was identifying I needed help. I actually went into treatment for 28 days. And here's the kicker. 28 days is not your primary length of time for an addiction program. 28 days is what the insurance companies will cover. So there's a little fact for you. But it's really knowing that I had a community to come out to. And for me at that point, I had been connected with my culture, but knowing, my intergenerational trauma and my residential schools, my grandfather and grandmother were knowing the lineage that I have come through, a lot of my strength came from those ancestors that were standing behind me and being my cheerleaders. So.
Love it. Thank you.
That was nice. Thank you so much to you both for being here today, to have this really important and inspirational and eye-opening conversation. So I want to thank you both for being here with me today. I feel like I'm still a newbie at this thing, but it's always nice to have a good chat with these amazing Indigenous colleagues of mine. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you, Michelle.
Right, such a great space to be a part of. Thank you so much for this, and looking forward to hearing from more of our amazing Indigenous colleagues here at the University of Alberta.
Thank you.
Hey.
Top way.